thank you for joining us and welcome to Business Incorporated. I'm Chimizi Obi Iwago. Coming up on the show, Zimbabwe plans gold and tobacco diaspora bonds as bank rules change. Steinhoff ex-partner wins case against scandal-hit retailer as Dutch court rules Steinhoff must amend 2016 accounts. Plus, winners emerge among Cairo stocks as Egypt starts to cut rate. Let's get the show started now with the markets. And here in Africa, Egypt continues to outperform its peers. At intraday, the index was up 0.28%. The Nigerian NSE and the South African JSE indices were both in the red. In the meantime, Nairobi closed down 0.02% on Monday. And in the Middle East, the markets were down at intraday in line with a pullback by Asian bourses and oil prices. Funds have been rotating into Saudi Arabia ahead of events such as MSCI's decision in June on whether to upgrade Riyadh to emerging market status and the planned listing of Saudi Aramco late in the year. Despite that, the Saudi stock index was down 0.25% at intraday. Dubai's index fell 0.84%, once again depressed by weak real estate stocks, with Emma Properties down 1%. In Abu Dhabi, the index fell 0.04%, but Abu Dhabi National Energy, which has been rising sharply since it reported nearly 2 weeks ago that it swung to an annual profit, jumped a further 9% in active trade. In Qatar, the index slipped 0.09%. Widam Food plunged 5.9%. Moving on now to Europe, stocks opened mixed in the morning as investors monitored the release of the latest batch of corporate earnings. Conrad Bussen, my colleague in Frankfurt, has the details. Good afternoon, Conrad. Thank you very much for coming through to us.
Hi, Jimmy. I hope you're fine. And hello to everyone in Nigeria.
Sure, I'm doing great. We're all doing fine here. Well, it's a busy week for banks on the stock markets. HSBC is not the only large bank reporting results. What's the trend like?
Well, Jimmy, the trend is rather positive. Europe's largest bank, HSBC, posted a huge increase in profits, a 141% increase in pre-tax profit compared to the same quarter the year before. The result is an indication that HSBC's strategy of pivot to Asia is paying off. You know, the bank has its origins in Asia, Hong Kong and Shanghai. Banking corporations, that's what the acronym HSBC stands for, and the bank is now concentrating more on its business on the Asian continent. Still, the result came in a bit weaker than what a majority of analysts had predicted, and this has to do with loan losses. HSBC itself says loan impairments were about $188 million higher than in the same period a year earlier. And that was, as HSBC puts it, largely driven by two individual corporate exposures in Europe. The bank itself doesn't say more, but the rumors are that those two loans have to do with Steinhoff and with Carillion. Steinhoff, remember, the retailer from South Africa with this accounting scandal. This company also has huge businesses here in Europe. And Carillion, the UK construction company that came into trouble towards the end of last year and went insolvent at the beginning of this year.
Now tell me, Conrad, have the large global banks put the crisis finally behind them?
Not entirely, Jimmy. You know, after the financial crisis, a huge amount of new regulation was imposed on the business of large corporate banks and investment banks. And you know those regulations and all this has made parts of this business pretty unprofitable. Barclays is another bank that is going to report its results this week. This bank still has a lot of trouble in its investment banking union. The Royal Bank of Scotland, RBS, is still facing a huge fine in the United States because of its mortgage selling practices in the past. Here in Frankfurt today, People are talking about Deutsche Bank again. The bank is expected to lay off a large amount of investment bankers, top-ranking investment bankers, mostly in its London and New York branches. The talk is about between 250 and 500 bankers losing their jobs at Deutsche Bank.
Now, a minister from Spain will become the next vice president of the ECB. What does this mean for Mario Draghi and his succession next year?
Well, you know, the unwritten rule in the Eurozone is that if a person from the south becomes the vice president of the European Central Bank, somebody from the north of the Eurozone should become the president. This means that with the nomination now of Luis de Guindos as vice president of the ECB, the chances are rising for Jens Weidmann. He's the chief of the Bundesbank, our reserve bank here in Germany, and he is always said to be keen on getting the job on the top level of the European Central Bank. So far, his chances were not really big, I have to say, because he is an outspoken enemy of the quantitative easing policies of the European Central Bank, which means he has a minority position in the Eurozone. But next year, when Mario Draghi will leave his post as president of the ECB, it's very likely that the bank will have returned to a much more conservative, stricter path of monetary policy, something more in line with the opinions of Jens Weidmann. So next year, he might be the right person for the job.
Okay, we'll wait and see what happens at that time when Draghi will leave that post. Thank you very much, Conrad, for your time. I hope to see you tomorrow. Enjoy the rest of the day.